Hello, this is Ashley Thompson. It's 12:30. I see people rapidly joining the call, so why don't we just give it 1 minute and then we can begin. All right, Karen, are you ready if I go ahead and get started?
I am.
Okay, great. First of all, I wanted to thank you all for joining the call. I can see that there are many colleagues engaged. We're also recording this call so that it will be available to colleagues after today. There's a chat feature on the webinar, and so participant lines are muted. We can unmute it towards the end of the conversation. We're using it to reduce ambient noise. But if you have any questions in the meantime, you're also welcome to submit them through the chat feature. And now I'll go ahead and introduce the call today. We're very pleased to have Karen DeMoss on the phone with us from Bank Street College of Education. I'm University Dean for Education at CUNY, and I've had the pleasure of speaking with Karen, and I know she's been able to speak with others around the state about the Sustainable Funding Project at Bank Street and some of the ideas which she'll present to us today. I'm really interested in hearing everyone's feedback at the end of the call, and I think there's lots of rich information and ideas to discuss here. You know, whether or not residencies schools think would meet the needs of their students is something, you know, we can debate, or specifics around funding or reallocation, some of the ideas in here. CUNY had students that tend to trend a little bit older. The average age of our bachelor degree seeking students in education is about 26. For associate degree students, it's 25. You know, these are all conversations we can have, but I think the important thing for me in Karen's work is really her and her colleagues bringing forward really deep thinking around ESSA, pushing us to think about a state and national dialogue in terms of how to, you know, expand clinical practice and move this work forward. And if you've had a chance to read the executive summary, you understand that that's their goal and intention, is really trying to do that. So we have about an hour today, and we'll hear from Karen, and we'll have an opportunity at the end to hear from you all and ask questions and share some thoughts about this. And in terms of our role as a CUNY community, I think there's an opportunity to decide, you know, how do we want to kind of engage ourselves and engage the state and the U.S. DOE, if we're even going to have one, around some of these broader questions. So anyway, Karen, those are some thoughts. I don't know, Stephanie, are you on the line? Okay, so we'll wait to hear from Stephanie Hill at the DOE a little bit later. She can jump in. But Karen, the stage is all yours. Thank you so much for being with us.
Super. I'm happy to be here. Thank you all for giving me your time before this holiday weekend. I hope everybody does have a good holiday weekend. Just as a point of clarification, because my screen is shared, I can't see the chat. So if you send a question that seems timely for the slide I'm on and I don't answer it, it's because I haven't seen the question. So we'll have to get to those in the end because of the way the technology is set up. In terms of the presentation, the first step that I want to do is kind of vision some of the linkages that we've been working with and working towards, then share some models that we've been seeing across the country in terms of how people have done some resource reallocation, and then really have that discussion about what might be interesting for CUNY schools. So this is really the kind of vision that we have, is an educational system that works for everybody, where districts have all of the diverse and promising candidates, they're knowledgeable, they're committed to the profession, they're going to stay in the profession, they're ready to lead on day one in their classrooms. Teachers, for their part, they are paid for their work as clinical practitioners doing part of the service delivery in schools. In our ideal vision, it is in a year-long practice, because that does offer the opportunity for somebody to understand sort of how to set up a year and how to end a year. But we understand also that those aren't possibilities for every single pathway model, and it might not be appropriate for every single candidate, certainly not, say, next fall, but it is the sort of vision that we have that they would actually be able to work side by side with an experienced teacher in year-long clinical practice and be paid for that work so that they can support themselves. In terms of CUNY and providers, we would have access to high-quality placement sites that are really ready to work deeply with us, and that we would also be able to incentivize people into our preparation programs because they can see that they're going to be well supported in these programs, including with the financial support in the prior picture of the aspiring teachers. Schools, for their part, the teachers inside schools would have professional development, leadership opportunities through their work with these aspiring teachers, and they also would be supported in a much richer learning community that's in partnership with the teacher preparation providers. Students and families would always have their well-prepared teachers teaching every student, and in the end, we actually think that this would actually save money for communities because of the kinds of partnerships that we would imagine over time would end up reducing needs for things like people going to summer school, would reduce turnover costs, and so these would be strong partnerships focused on the public good. And what we found when we did all our research trying to figure this out is when you have sustainable funding for quality teacher preparation, all of those dreams can become a reality. So for districts, sorry, I clicked a little too fast. They actually reduce recurring costs associated with rapid teacher turnover, recruitment, personnel processing, certification tracking. Those are really big expenses, especially in a large district like the New York City DOE. Aspiring teachers, they can afford to join the profession. They get extended clinical residency. They feel prepared. They actually stay longer, even when they are in less functional schools. Providers have stable cohorts of teacher candidates. They become partners in district development philosophy of their philosophies and strategies inside schools. They really are seen as part of the visioning of how to make schools really strong. And actually their cohorts save them money because they're no longer offering very small class sizes because they can recruit people for a full cohort of people. Schools, they get a teacher development continuum for their current teachers, and they have a tendency to stay more inside the classroom instead of seeking leadership positions outside of the classroom because they have a meaningful role in teacher preparation. Students and families have less need for remediation, as I said earlier, and we do get taxpayer long-term savings, increased quality of life, less of the kinds of social challenges that we find when people are less educated. So that's the vision that we have, and so what we are funded to do, and we're funded through grants, we're funded to support high-quality, sustainably funded teacher preparation. So when we got this funding, people were often asking us what high quality was and what sustainably funded was, and so we did a lot of research to figure out what kinds of things the research had a sense of agreement on, not always 100%, but a sense of an agreement on high quality. And the principles that we bucketed the work into are that the preparation providers ensure candidates are diverse, committed, and effective. There's a lot of disagreement about what it means to ensure that. As we all know, I had led a teacher preparation program. As we all know, things like CAPE and NCTQ want that ensuring to come via things like grade point averages or test scores. But there are other ways, and so we did not want to get into the idea that, you had to select based on test scores or anything like that. But we did want them to be diverse, committed, and effective, and those capture the kinds of things that supposedly the test scores are proxies for, at least for some populations. So that's one of the principles. Second kind of principle is that the teacher candidates are experts in human development, including, of course, child development, content, and pedagogy, including all the kinds of pedagogy, content-specific pedagogy, culturally relevant pedagogy, age-appropriate pedagogy. So those are principles that are very clear in the literature and that obviously higher education has had a long commitment to. The third principle is one that our field has been asked to increase our work with, which is clinical practice. And we as an organization trying to support richer clinical practice, sustained clinical practice, We did end up landing on the idea of a year-long pre-service co-teaching, a residency, as the ideal, but certainly moving towards that ideal is better than not moving towards that ideal. But I'm going to go ahead for the rest of the discussion, talk about a year-long residency, and I'll share why in a little bit. And the fourth principle is that the providers and the districts work together to meet candidates and students' needs. And that becomes really important, obviously, with the deep partnership that CUNY has with the New York City DOE and how large the DOE and how varied the kinds of needs are in the DOE. And so that I know you guys will have a really deep conversation with based on your sort of on-the-ground experiences. We're working with, obviously, no district that's as large as the DOE because it's only the DOE that is this large. So some of the translations of the principles might look different as you all discuss them here. So the sustainably funded part is the piece that we're really focused on. And there are three principles inside sustainable funding. One is that it's secure, meaning that when we have a change in administration, hopefully including even an administration that is so dramatically changed as the one that's coming in, the money streams would withstand the leadership changes. So they're not just sort of an add-on piece, they're kind of part of the core piece. Second is that it's public dollars, that we don't have to constantly go out and write grants. Most of us wrote TQP grants or other kinds of grants to support some kinds of programs, but then we have to either cut those programs when those grants are over or look for more grant funding, and that's not a sustainable funding approach. And the last one is that it's adequate, meaning not only do the providers and the district have the monies to support whatever kinds of mentoring is going on, whatever kind of teaching is going on, but also the candidates themselves can afford to live. We know of a lot of programs where candidates do not have the kind of sustainable funding they need, and they, after working all day, then they go take classes in the evening, and then after that they go and work, or they stay on somebody's couch while they're doing their student teaching or their clinical practice because they simply can't afford to live on the amount of money that they have. So those are the principles for sustainably funded. So we were launched by Bank Street's Division of Innovation Policy and Research because our president and the dean of research here, many of you may know Shail Polakosaransky and Josh Thomas's, they had been in the DOE and they saw the challenge of teacher preparation and its funding from the district side. And then coming here to Bank Street, they saw the challenge from higher ed side because we'd had lots and lots of wonderful grants and wonderful programs, and then the grants would disappear and the programs would disappear. So they pitched the idea that we needed to figure out across the nation how we can think more strategically about getting sustainable funding for quality preparation. And so we have some grants that fund us currently through the end of December 2017, and that means that anything that we do, we sort of do in service to providers and districts that are interested in working with us and states, and I can tell you a little bit about that. We, any of these that have stars in them, we actually have done some pretty substantive work in. All of the ones that have circles in them, we're still in conversations with. So let me share a couple of things that we've done. So in Michigan, we help them navigate with the U.S. Department of Education an approval of $2.2 million of leftover Title II dollars from No Child Left Behind to support residency development, and the first year of those dollars is going to support the school sites to make them sort of residency ready, and then the second set of dollars is going to be to support the residency candidates. It's a very big shift from the kinds of ways they were spending those monies before. It took a lot of negotiations with the U.S. DOE to get that approved, but we got that approved. Louisiana, we've helped them pass some legislation and consider some adjustments in other legislation because they wanted longer clinical practice for undergrads, which is a little bit easier of a shift for most general state systems, and your CUNY population that may not be the case for, but in Louisiana, most of their systems, it was an easier shift to manage, and we've helped them figure out also some ways to get some funding for candidates as they're doing that. In Oregon, we've worked with the Oregon ACTE chapter to develop a study that's going to have them take a look at the different kinds of clinical practice that the various programs across the states have used over the past couple of years, and take a look at the EdTPA results by rubric item to see whether or not across those various clinical practice pieces there's any kind of association between clinical practice and various rubric performances. So we've done a lot of different things in different states, and would be happy to explore what might make sense for New York City. So I'm going to move to reallocation models and spend a little bit of time on this slide. This is a hypothetical but average-sized district, which has about 190 teachers in the United States. Obviously, an average-sized district in the United States looks nothing like New York City Department of Education schools. And so this what you're looking at here is a little bit harder to wrap one's head around inside the New York City DOE, and we've talked with the DOE about these models so they're aware of them, but the way it might play out here would look different. Nevertheless, it's a sort of an interesting intellectual activity to go through to take a look at each of these lines. So the current spending over on the left side of the chart is what an average district would actually be spending given what the national averages are. So currently, substitutes make up 7% of the national teaching force. At a roughly $30,000 full-time equivalent salary, that means that there's $400,000 spent on substitute teachers in this nation, in this average-sized district over the course of a year. So if you could design a model in this particular district where you had a whole cohort of resident teachers who were there all year long, beginning of the year to the end of the year, and 4 days a week they were serving in their co-teaching residency position, and 1 day a week they were substituting in the district, not receiving substitute pay, but instead that substitute savings could go into the pool of dollars for the entire residency program, including monies for, say, the mentor teachers, perhaps some kind of exchange of services support for whatever the teacher preparation provider was doing. That would be $300,000 of potentially reallocated money that could go towards a residency effort in that hypothetical average-sized district. Similarly, assistant teachers make up 11% of the national teaching force, and at the same rough salary amount, and these are again national averages of $30,000, you get I think it's $33,000, you get $660,000. And if you just take, say, 25% of those assistant teachers, maybe as they retire or move, you don't replace assistant teacher lines. Instead, you have those lines be taken by well-prepared resident candidates who've gone through the first portion of a program, and then they can then come in and become residents, and that $165,000 is saved because they're inside the classroom serving the same kinds of functions as an assistant teacher might have. Another pot of money that districts generally have is a professional development set of money. National averages say that there's anywhere from $6,000 to $18,000 per year per teacher that we spend on professional development, which is a pretty big chunk of money. What those actual estimates are very difficult to pin down, and even inside districts, it's very difficult for districts to understand where different professional development dollars come from and go to, because there's so many different pots. But let's just say if we took some portion of the professional development dollars, maybe 10%, maybe you could get another $225,000 in this district. And then after school dollars are $600 per week per teacher. So if you estimate a spring and a fall after school, take 10% of that and you have a resident serve in the after school program, again without pay, recuperate those dollars. That experience in the after school program becomes part of their learning experience, just as the substitute work did. Then you have another $22,000. So those monies might allow that district to have $712,000 available from reallocation. And if that district wanted to pay residents $15,000 per resident, the district could fund 47 residents, which is probably a lot more than that district might need given that the whole district hypothetically is only 190 teachers. So that's an example of ways that districts can think about this resource reallocation. And we're working with some smaller districts to figure these things out. We've got some meetings with superintendents and providers in New Jersey to try to figure out how to make these things sustainable so that their residents can have enough money to work all year long with them. This is the second quick entry reallocation model that I want to share with you, which is what we call a quick entry reallocation model. The assumption here is that if we could, we would prefer to have people not only do a summer of training, we would prefer people to have a longer amount of training before they're the teacher of record in a classroom. So if that assumption is correct, and we imagined in this example that we always need 100 quick entry sort of summer trained teachers to fill vacancies that programs have not graduated the students for. So whether it's special education or secondary STEM or English language learners, we all know the usual suspects, right? So every year the district needs these 100 quick entry teachers. The idea in this model, as you read down the 2017 column, is that through some fundraising, you figure out a way to get an additional 25 residents. That little green person there represents 25. So a 25-person cohort that gets funded through externally raised money. And that set of people goes through the same quick entry process, but in addition to that 25 set of people goes through a year-long co-teaching residency, so that the following year in 2018, those green people get to take up 25 residency-prepared people, so the district would then only need 75 quick entry teachers the following year. They could spend the monies that they might currently be spending on the quick entry people, which national averages say is somewhere between $17,000 and $28,000 per person for the training portion, not the salary portion. And they would have that money then available to use for the training program, the cohort program for the following year. So we raise another money for another 25 the following year in 2019. Now we only have 50 quick entry people needed. We raise another money for another 25 in 2020, and now we only need 25. So you can see that over the course of 4 years, by raising the money for a quarter of the people that we need to roll out of quick entry into a longer clinical preparation, we might be able to shift those programs, and the dollars that used to be spent on the recruiting and preparation in the summer programs for the quick entry programs might be able to be reallocated towards some longer-term clinical practice preparation. So those are a couple of the reallocation models, and now I want to talk with you about what Ashley shared in terms of the ESSA opportunities. So when we first started this work, I actually came on the Monday after ESSA was signed into law, so that was pretty exciting, and we spent a long time reading the piece and speaking with our contacts at the US DOE about how we could interpret those pieces and about how they were going to be sharing guidance on ESSA given some of the language in there. So I want to share with you a couple of things that have been challenges in the ESEA, well, through No Child Left Behind, and that remained actually in some of the language in ESSA. So the first is that probably for reasons that some of us can understand, the language in No Child Left Behind talked about recruiting and retaining teachers. Those are not functions that higher ed traditionally has had a role in, but the dollars from No Child Left Behind were very readily funneled through recruiting and retaining teachers, but not so much preparing teachers. Even though it was technically possible, that wasn't inside the language. The second challenge in the ESSA document as it was written into law is that it included the term residencies as a specific description of a specific activity that states could opt into via an academies approach. And there's nothing intrinsically wrong with the Academy's approach, but there's only 2% of state funds that are eligible for the Academy's approach, and the Academy's approach for residencies also excludes coursework. It's a competencies-based approach, which means that a lot of higher education institutions and their expertise more than likely would not apply to have academies. So there are a couple of challenges with that. We lose all of your expertise through if we only use the academies route for residencies, and it's only 2% of the total state dollars inside this one portion of ESSA, which means it's only going to be a small portion of people who might have access to those dollars. So we worked with the US DOE, and we're very, very happy that their new guidance on Title II clarifies a couple of things. One is that you absolutely can prepare quality teachers with these dollars, and second, that residencies are eligible for all of Title II dollars. So we're really happy about that. Not that everybody's going to do it, but that districts now have the opportunity, if it makes sense for them with the providers that they're working with, they literally can propose something in deep partnership with their providers to use those funds in a way that really support whole school improvement. When you've got a resident who's in there from the beginning of the school year till the end of the school year, it's pretty clear from the data that have come out through individual programs that the children inside the classrooms themselves during that residency training year, the children improve in their performance at a higher rate than children in classrooms that do not have that sort of second teacher in there, and also that you get candidates who are better prepared and already really kind of embedded inside the district. So there are a lot of benefits to it if it works for a district and a provider partnership to do this. The last piece that's kind of important is that school-wide, the guidance that has just come out makes even clearer, that this is actually also in guidance from the Spellings Administration. It makes it even clearer that school-wide programs, the schools can use dollars from IDEA, ESEA, Perkins, and other sources to create kind of holistic programs. And the percent free and reduced lunch limit now is 35% to become a school-wide program, and so it's not just that that you don't have to sort of track dollars to students and separate students out for school-wide programs. It's actually that you can design really, really creative and holistic programs that serve all kids in the building and pool dollars in order to make sure those children have those sorts of learning opportunities that they need. So this is what we're working with states on right now, is thinking about this ESSA opportunity with a view towards this continuum of teacher quality. Over on the left-hand side, it looks like keeping the old NCLB models, and way over on the right-hand side, a state might actually co-design new models with its districts and its teacher preparation providers. Probably there's not a lot of time for that to happen, but certainly these two pieces in the middle of this continuum of allowing districts flexibility, so you and the DOE together talking about how you might like to design things that would help the teacher preparation pipeline and the district's need for hiring and the school improvement efforts that the district will be implementing under ESSA. Having more flexibility from the state that you guys can design what you want is a really helpful thing, and that's something that's pretty easy to get inside the state application. And then proposing new district models, states might actually include some examples, not as requirements, but examples of what new district models might look like, including something like a residency. So you can take a look yourselves at what some of the status quo thinking is. You know, student teachers don't need money, higher education does theory, districts do practice, ESSA is about practice. These are some of the kinds of status quo thinking pieces that have a reimagined thinking that is really about what our vision is embracing, and that by thinking more in these reimagined ways, we can have a stronger program. The piece I want to highlight here is that boutique programs, the kinds that we've been able to construct that are really wonderful through something like a teacher quality partnership grants or some of the grants that came through when New York State had the Race to the Top dollars coming through. They're great, but they're not enough to really change the system, and they're not enough to show that teacher preparation is as high quality across the board as it needs to be. And so trying to think in ways that move beyond the idea of shifting one of our programs and move towards the idea of shifting all of our programs into as much quality clinical practice as we can muster in partnership with the district is sort of what we're about. So with that, I have written a few discussion questions, discussion ideas, though you all probably have lots of your own, but I'll just state them and then I'll go back to the other screen so I can join what you all are saying and I can see some of your questions. So one, what's exciting or problematic about this vision? Two, what might, in particular, obviously, the New York City DOE need from CUNY colleges in order to really feel good about using ESSA funds for candidates? We find that districts do have some sort of requirements that are absolute non-negotiables if they're going to think about reallocating ESSA dollars in these kinds of ways. And then finally, what really Ashley started out with, are there things that CUNY might be interested in thinking about in terms of larger policy discussions in the state? So thanks for listening.
All right. So Karen, thank you so much. Stephanie Hill from the DOE has joined us. Stephanie, if there's anything you want to say. For the rest of our participants, you're welcome to use the chat feature, and I can moderate any questions to Karen. Karen, maybe you answered all of these questions already. All right, I'm not seeing anything through the chat, but feel free to send them across. Oh, and we do have one question, so maybe we can start off with this. This question asks about whether you've considered models where the resident is a part-time teacher of record, and then the schools and any district would share the stipend cost.
Yeah, so there are lots of different ways that people are configuring these. One of the more common not full-time approaches that we see is that, say, in the fall semester, the candidate is in the school like 2 full-time days and a half day a week, and then in the spring they're in full-time. So that's a kind of approach that we've seen. In terms of the larger, I mean, we are sort of working from a labor market concept here. In terms of the larger labor market shift that we might say we were trying to support, we're following the kind of model that the medical profession used. Most of us, if not all of us, have heard about the Flexner report almost as a sort of a hammer on higher ed, that we need to have a Flexner report for higher education, because when they fixed medical education and got rid of all the quackery in medical education, they did all of these things to the medical preparation sector. One of the things they don't talk about, though, is that they also gave it money. So when they did all of the curricular revisions, the longer time for clinical practice, et cetera, to improve medical education, they also managed to get stipends for aspiring doctors. One of the principles of that model is the aspiring doctor, the intern, and the resident, they are service providers. They're giving service to patients. They're part of the service provision team. This is a very common professional development model, sort of an internship concept where you are part of the whatever kind of business or profession it is, and that profession, that business, that point of service, they are the ones responsible for your pay. So we went with that model because that makes sense in a longer-term vision of what the labor market might contemplate for teachers. Ultimately, depending on what kind of efforts happen or or don't at least disappear in education, we might think that that would be something that would be supported at a federal level, just as medical education is. We spend about $11.5 billion a year on medical preparation. Every doctor who graduates has received about $500,000 in public supports to get that training. We're all good with that because it's very important that our doctors be well trained. We think it's equally important that teachers be well trained, and so that we would hope ultimately come through some kind of larger federal funding scheme. So that's all to say, we think that the stipend for the resident probably ultimately makes more sense in general from at the sort of school or district level. That doesn't mean that as you're building towards a more systemic approach with a deeper connection between providers and districts, that those costs might not be shared in different sorts of ways to meet your particular needs and your particular capacities at this time.
Hi, Ashley.
Great,
Can you hear
thank
me?
you. Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry, I felt like I was talking to myself a few minutes ago. I wasn't unmuted. Hi, everyone. This is Stephanie Hill from the New York City Department of Ed. Thank you for inviting me to also just sort of add a little bit of context to some of the work that we've been already talking to a lot of you about. And I want to make sure that I call out a little bit of, I think, one of the things that I think Karen was trying to express a few times is the really big difference in scale that we're dealing with here in the DOE. And this is part of the, part of the reason why, we are able to do things at very different cost structures than others. So, we're looking to hire, as from your work with Ashley and from our team, roughly around 6,000 teachers a year. And I think for us, it's really important that we are working together with you to try to find, like we've been working on our teaching academies, and the work that you heard from us about in the spring with the Deputy Chancellor and Amy. And many of you have been working with Erica from my team on how we can partner more closely. We've been piloting this with Citi this year on improving the quality of our clinical preparation by working with some factors like making sure we've got high quality clinical prep faculty that are working from our side, making sure that our cooperating teachers are getting trained, making sure that we're partnering with you all on making this a slightly longer, more robust full-time experience for our teachers. And I think that I don't want us to, I want us to really think about how we can continue to improve this and know that we are really interested in ensuring that all 6,000 of our teachers, and especially the 3,000-ish or more that are coming from CUNY, all of them are getting a better clinical experience. And so I think there are some ways to go about that that Karen has brought up, and I think we can definitely engage in a deeper conversation. But there are also some challenges that we face in that, some of the areas where Karen's pointing out that we might have funding, for example, on the, our sort of quicker preparation models. Our quicker preparation model is necessary to get us to the extra 1,000 teachers that we need to fill, and because it's so high scale, the cost for it is far lower than what many other regions are having to pay. And then because of some of our negotiations with our union, which we could continue to work through, some of our salary and fringe benefits that we have typically used, for example, with the residency that Hunter is working on with New Visions, we're looking at a $23,000 salary for residents plus fringe, and that's what's been negotiated there. So I want us to be careful of, steering away from some more of the boutique in lieu of really getting at some of the deeper issues that can impact at a much larger scale. And I think through some of our partnerships with the teaching academies, we're on our way there, and I'm really excited about working together with you on that, plus looking at some of these options that Karen has laid out to make sure that we're thinking really strategically about how to use all the resources that are in front of us.
Thanks, Stephanie. Karen, this is Ashley. I had a question about your map and all the different states, and you mentioned, that you've been working with, different legislators and educational bodies around the country to move some of this forward. Is there like a particular example of something that's been exciting for you in a context that's very different from New York, where you think there may be some lessons to learn here?
Yeah, there are a couple of things that we are just really excited about. So one is in Colorado. So Colorado has a very diverse and robust environment in terms of pathways. They have about 12 teacher preparation programs that are residency-based in Denver. And all of them partner with Denver Public Schools in one way or another, and they come from 8 different sorts of groups. 7 of those are different kinds of higher ed, public and private, and one of them is a sort of a combined group now of what were completely non-higher ed based alternative programs, plus the district's own district-based programs. So lots of different varieties. They are really interested in finding out for themselves what across residency programs, because they all also have non-residency programs, they're all boutiques except for the alternative group, what matters in their residency work. They all have a sense that their residency models are preferable to their non-residency models. In general, a couple of them will stand very strongly behind some of their other models, but in general they actually like their residency models and their candidates like their residency models, but they can't really come together and say which parts of those models are the most important. So they're going to be doing a scan of all of the sorts of features from recruitment all the way through their follow-up after people have graduated across all of these, and then the intention of this is to give feedback to the state about what they think the state should be looking for in terms of quality clinical practice and models for teacher preparation, because all the state is using right now to assess teacher preparation providers is value-added test scores. So there's a sort of a policy vacuum. They want to both find out for themselves so that they can talk about it and create their narratives and improve themselves, and they want to inform state policy based on what they find. So we put in an IES grant with them and are looking for some additional monies to start that work before the IES decision and monies come through, and that's a really exciting piece, I think. The other that's really exciting to me is the work that is happening in New Jersey. We have worked with the New Jersey ACTE group, just presented to the whole of all of the deans. It's a very active ACTE group. They meet every month. Their representatives are on all of the various New Jersey alphabet soup of education groups, and they report back about what's going on in terms of policy, in terms of these different stakeholder groups. They're part of the ESSA, and the information comes back to all the deans about what's being talked about. So it's a very nice, tight-knit group in terms of information exchange. And they have 3 providers that have been doing boutique residencies that are now interested in making all of their programs move towards larger residencies. So they're kind of leading the way, and what they are looking to do is, instead of being reactive to state policy, which has it actually did put into law requirements for longer clinical practice, instead of being reactive to those policies, they want to also be leaderful in those policies. So they are working with their partner districts to figure out how to grow these programs for all of their candidates, and that will be sort of the forefront of the teacher preparation leadership about what the policy should look like in New Jersey. You may have noticed in the principles that the New York State sent out about what it was thinking might go into the ESSA application. New York State is also embracing language that we're seeing across the country around longer clinical preparation. Most state education departments have actually already toyed with the idea of requiring year-long residencies, and that the requirement makes it really difficult for places to roll out all of their programs. So it's just something to bear in mind, and New Jersey successfully fought back the requirement, but it is going to be moving in that direction, so they want to be informing what that's going to look like as it moves forward.
Thank you for those examples. We had another question through the chat feature, Karen, for you, about funding clinical supervision. So you talked about funding residents, but lots of observations is expensive, and do you have any thoughts about funding those and covering those costs?
Yes, so we there's something that has, I think we've discovered, although our N is very small right now, but I think what we've discovered is it's very expensive to fund supervision when what we have is a boutique program, but all of our other programs are running regularly. And so what we found, there are a few places that have actually flipped all of their programs over into residencies. Texas Tech has done it, ASU has done it, South Dakota has done it. In all of those places, what they have done is construct a different kind of a structure for clinical practice. One of the principles in all of those programs that a lot of other places, like this is happening in Indiana also, they're looking to flip to a required residency, and the principles that people work from in order to keep those costs for supervision down are that you don't place people all over the city. You have some sort of residency preparation sites. You have some schools, just like the academies that you all are working with the DOE on, you have some schools that are the places where this is happening. And the clinical supervisor actually works in those schools, is connected to those schools. Sometimes, depending on how large the schools and how large the programs are, sometimes those placements are like full-time. I'm only in one school. Sometimes, depending on how many people are in your program, that supervisor might be in 2 or at most 3 schools, going between those schools. That creates a really strong partnership between the provider and the school. And it also supports the school's own school improvement efforts because they're part of professional development inside the school. So it's a really rich model that people really like once they make the flip. The flip is kind of hard because it's a lot of sort of upending of people's habits of work. But once they make the flip, they seem to be very happy with it. What we know so far, and again, ours is the funding project, right? So we're always trying to look at the dollar sides of these. What we've learned so far is that in a larger program, you actually end up saving money with that flip because you're not paying for people to go to all sorts of different places, and you sort of get economies of scale in your supervision. So that's a hopeful note for preparation providers.
Great, thank you. What other questions does the group have or any comments? Karen, is your email in the slide deck, your contact information, if anyone wants? It is.
It's the last slide, absolutely.
Okay, great. So that's another option too. All right, well, if no more questions come through, please feel free to contact Karen or Stephanie or me or any of your other colleagues who have participated in this. But I want to say thank you again to Karen for preparing this deck, for considering these questions and models so deeply, and for sharing your time and expertise with us.
Well, I hope some of the ideas are helpful to somebody somewhere, and if there's anything that we can do, please do let us know.
Thank you. And just to note for our participants that this call has been recorded, and so we'll be able to share it with any of your colleagues who weren't able to participate. Just let me know, and we'll make that available. All right. Thank you so much, and have a happy Thanksgiving,
Thanks,
everybody.
Ashley.